Welcome to the show. I'm Maggie.
I'm Mike.
And this is Friends on Fire.
And we are on a mission to get friends to talk about money. As a follow-up to a recent episode we did with Chris from Inspire to Fire, we have another episode of quarantine interviews, or whatever you'd like to call it, with another member of the FIRE community. And we're excited to hear his story.
Yeah, today we are interviewing Scott Vance, who runs the Sheepdog Financial podcast, which is a podcast focused on military-specific financial issues faced by military members. So, hey, Scott, we really appreciate you joining us.
Well, thanks. Thanks for having me on the show.
We would love to have you start by just telling our listeners a little bit about yourself.
Sure. So I host a military-focused podcast, and that's because I retired from the Army after 22 years. Immediately after retiring, I decided to do something not even close to what I did in the Army and started a financial planning and tax practice business, which I've done now for the last about 4 years.
What did you do in the Army before then?
So I started out, my first half of my career was field artillery. And then the second half was I switched over to civil affairs, special operations. So the second half of my career was spent in Nepal, Bangladesh, the Philippines, Thailand.
Wow.
My area of focus was Asia. So bouncing in and out of embassies on small teams throughout those countries.
Wow, sounds fascinating. And you're right, very different than what you're doing now, it sounds like.
Oh yeah, totally. My last job last year in the Army, I spent working at the U.S. Embassy in Kathmandu, Nepal. So great time, and it made my transition out of the military really easy because it let me kind of focus. So it was awesome.
And so, what's your life like now? Where do you live?
So I'm in and around Raleigh, North Carolina, Holly Springs specifically. We've been in this area now for 4 years, which is almost making my skin crawl because I've never been in the same place. Yeah, I got to get up and move. So
that's funny. So are you, Scott, like, we're just curious, like, are you married? Do you have kids? Like, just kind of on a personal level, a little about you too.
Sure. So I'm married. I have one son. He's 12. And again, this is his first time he's been in the same school for, well, now it's 3 years. But he had been in like kindergarten in one school, first grade in another school, but so it's a good experience.
How did you kind of end up coming across the idea of financial independence or FIRE, and what kind of got you into this?
Sure. Well, it kind of fits, FIRE, financial independence, retire early, kind of, I'm in the military. I'm retired at 41. With my retirement, I could have really just lived off of it. So maybe not the same ideas as the traditional FIRE folks, but almost by default, we fit into that, I think.
So Scott, I think for people who probably aren't aware, can you tell us about how the military pensions work, how long you have to stay in active, and then what percentage of your salary you get? Sure.
So, and it's actually changed. So I'll highlight I came under the old program where basically you had to do 20 years. And at 20 years, you could retire with full medical and then basically half of your salary. Now, under the new system, which they just changed, it was about 2 years ago, they retire full medical. After 20 years, they'll retire with full medical. They have a traditional pension system where they would, if they do 20 years, they retire with 40% of their salary. And then they have similar to a 401k, it's called the Thrift Savings Plan, which is for government folks and matching contributions and stuff like that. So it's changed a little bit, but still a pretty decent pension at 20 years.
Yeah, that's so interesting. So was your point that at your 20 years, at 50% of your salary, that essentially was enough for you to live off of if you wanted to live at that level?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, that's great. That's amazing. There's so much around being in the military that is, hard and difficult, I'm sure. But that is a really amazing opportunity to be able to be sort of, taken care of in that way.
Yeah.
After giving that much service.
And it was, the old traditional system was very good for people that retired. I'm glad they shifted to the new system because I think the figure was 85% of service members left the service without any retirement. You can take that TSP 401k part with you. So a lot of people would, do 6 years in the military, get out, and have no retirement to take with them. But now that's hopefully fixed with the new system of retirement that they have.
So before it was an all or nothing plan. If you left before, you had nothing.
Oh, yeah, I see what you mean.
I can see why that's a struggle for people.
Yeah. Yeah, you found a lot of people holding on. Maybe that had, well, like even in my case, I had wanted to get out. And I finally had the opportunity, but I was at like 15 years. And I was like, I'm not getting out and walking away from that retirement at this point.
5 years away from, 50% forever. It's pretty nice. Scott, I'm curious, when you were in the military for those 20 years, how were you sort of financially living your life? Like, were you being really frugal? Were you saving for the future?
So early on, no. Early on, it was, I call it almost like being in college, except we had money. I did a tour in South Korea at the time, and it was like, as soon as the day would end, we'd all be walking over to the called Katusa snack bar, but it was basically like a convenience store on post, and we'd get a case of beer and we'd spend all our money and drink it away, and then get up the next morning. So that's probably was more like the first like 6, 7, 8 years of my career. And then I started shifting, and I was lucky that before, all the deployment started after September 11th, I started thinking about putting my money away. So a big thing you see in military folks is they'll do a deployment, come back, and they have all this cash because of combat zone tax exclusion. You're away for a year, so you can't really spend money. So they'll come back and buy like a Corvette or some expensive car, and then they're back in the in the hole trying to. So I was lucky that I started being a little bit more thoughtful with my money before that. So that has, it was fun those couple of years of being in college again and having money, but it was better to save the money.
So Scott, this is a quick comment share that will eventually turn into a question, but
okay.
Bear with me.
It may also never turn into a question. This is kind of Maggie's style.
Yeah. So as I was mentioning to you earlier, I binge listened to a bunch of your episodes yesterday and really enjoyed them. And I am not in the military, and neither is Mike, though I do have a number of family members who are former military. But I really enjoyed the episodes. For what it's worth, my favorites were number 30, Phi with Doug Nordman, number 17, Moving with the Military with Maria Reed. Really enjoyed that one. And number 22, Changing the Way You Think About Money and Retiring Before Mom and Dad with Rob Berger. Those were probably my top 3. But the one thing that really struck me as I was kind of listening to all these and just thinking about hearing people talk about their goals, financial freedom, and kind of their finances were just how similar we all are. Because I think I went into it thinking like, oh, you may talk about a lot of topics that are, very military specific. And that may not really apply to me. But I just really was sort of struck by the idea that everything everybody was saying, though there were certain terms of like, what a 401k is in the military and, different types of like classes of funds that you guys can invest in, and all of that were different. The general sort of just themes and goals and everything else were the same. Mike is smiling at me because he's like, are you ever going to get to a question? But I was really struck by the fact that it reminded me how kind of the overall toolbox and the things we have available to us really are all the same, whether military or civilian, and that we're, more alike than we are different. So turning into the actual question here, I'm curious what you think some of the kind of biggest differences are in terms of personal finance and financial independence for people in the military versus civilians, if that's what you call us.
Yeah. Well, yeah, you were right. I mean, everything's kind of the same, like you talked about. When I tell people I'm going to PCS, I know what they mean. To you all,
I know
civilians,
that means to move. By the way, now
yes,
I learned that on your podcast.
Yep. Yeah. So PCS, DFAC, TSP, BRS, all these terms that are foreign and sometimes intimidating to people that aren't in the military really are kind of. I mean, PCS is a move. DFAC is a dining facility, place that you eat. Blended retirement system is so it's just it's kind of the same as everything, but just the nuances are a little bit different. Probably the biggest mistake, one of the biggest mistakes I see in my financial planning and tax practice for military folks, it's been recurring again recently, is taxability of like spousal income. So there's this law, the Military Spouse Residency Relief Act. Basically what that allows is if a spouse follows a service member to another duty station. So say, like for instance, in my case, I was born in Pennsylvania, and in the military I was all over. Once I was married to my wife, she was able, traditionally when she would move, she would have to take the state residency of the state that she was in. So then her income, if while in that state, becomes taxable for that state's income. But under the Military Spouse Residency Relief Act, once we were, say, she was able to take my state of residency in the state of Pennsylvania. Does that make sense? So
yeah, so even though you're moving around, you actually get taxed in your home state?
Yep.
That's interesting.
Yes.
I didn't realize that.
So the 22 years I was in the Army, I was a Pennsylvania state resident, filing a tax return with the state of Pennsylvania, and my income was exempt from Pennsylvania state tax. And once my wife married me, she was able to follow me and also maintain that Pennsylvania state residency and exempt her income as well.
That's cool. Is that why she married you, Scott?
Oh, yeah, totally.
You were like, I propose, but also just so you know, there's this new act where your taxes are going to be better.
Yeah, a lot of people don't realize that. I constantly get people that come in and I take a look and it's like, you've been paying, for instance, I recently had a client come in and he's a dentist in the Army and his wife is a nurse practitioner. So she makes a pretty decent salary. And so they've paid the last 2 years. I think she paid about $5,000 in North Carolina state income tax when she shouldn't. So we had to go back and amend and get that money back. But that's a lot of money that people don't realize that they don't have to be paying. So that's probably one of the biggest things in the differences is those state tax residencies. The other thing is, there's the military with the change in the retirement system. It used to be most military folks never really paid attention to their retirements. It was kind of do 20 years and it's there. But now you got to start putting thought into it, how you're going to allocate the funds within that thrift savings plans, how you're going to, are you putting 15 or 10% into it or whatever the decisions that have to be made there. That whole shift of retirement thinking from where you do 20 years and you walk away to, you still do 20 years, get a pretty decent pension, but you have to put some thought behind the 401k like side of it. So that's been a shift.
And for what it's worth, I think civilians also have the same struggles. They get to a point where they now need to start evaluating how they're going to allocate their resources, how they're going to plan for retirement. It's a little bit different because there's not this fixed pension, but I think a lot of civilian workers are transitioning away from company-sponsored pension plans and into self-directed plans. And so it's there's a lot of similarities there. Yeah.
So in the military, when you come in, they not forced, but they automatically, I think it's the first year, the military contributes to the 401k element side of your retirement plan. I think the rate is 5%. I'd have to check and make sure. But just as a way to automatically start people down that road. And then later on, that individual has a decision whether to continue that or, not contribute or not to continue those contributions, which at that point, the military would switch to a matching system. So they provide a basic small amount to seed it to start. And then after, a period, the military only matches what the service member provides.
So you're running a tax and financial advising company now. You're clearly passionate about it. How did you get this interest, and then how did you actually make the decision to go do it?
That was my plan when I was thinking about getting out of the Army 10, 15, whatever it was, years ago. I, in fact, had started down the road of becoming a CFP back in certified. So CFP is the certified financial planner back in right after September 11th, which my plan was to get out, but obviously that didn't work. So I just always had a natural drive for money. I mean, as a kid, I worked for my parents, helping them balance the books, with a bookkeeper. They had a small business, so I would sit with the bookkeeper and help them, in this big journal with moving numbers back and forth. And I just always liked
it's the original Excel.
Yeah. Yeah. I know, like, when people say like a journal, I still think of the green sheets
ledgers,
with all the lines. Yeah.
I remember that actually at my first job. I worked in a grocery store and we had to write a bunch of stuff in like an old green ledger. And
yeah. Yep. Yeah.
That's funny. We always actually like to ask about people's childhood and kind of, what taught you some of the lessons, excuse me, what taught you some of the lessons that you kind of learned about money at a young age. So it's cool that you brought in kind of how you grew up doing that with your parents.
Yeah.
Okay. So keep going. You were talking about how you kind of got into this.
Yeah. Don't let Maggie interrupting you throw you off too much.
Yeah. I just had a natural liking of it. I taught, when I was in the Army, they opened up the thrift savings plan. Thrift savings plan used to only be for federal employees. And then probably about September 11th, they opened it up to military members as well. And which I was awesomely excited about, but I also saw that the Army didn't really provide any kind of training to soldiers and stuff like that. So me and a friend got together and we taught people within our units about the thrift savings plan and so it was just a natural, I always enjoyed it. And I see financial planning almost as a continuation of my time in the Army, where you have concern for the people that work for you and lead, probably not in a way that's seen in the civilian world. So, as a leader, you're responsible for the people that work for you. You provide mentorship, and almost, not to sound in a pejorative way, but almost like a paternalistic type of way, where you're trying to foster them on their personal side as well as their job performance. That makes sense. So
yeah, it does. So do you see your business now as a continuation of what you were doing out of passion in the military?
Yeah, I call it. I served 22 years in the Army. I continue my service helping people with their finances. It's a total continuation.
That's great
for me.
Hey, Scott, when you advise people, does your company or kind of your general philosophy, do you have any particular point of view that you are, like, I know we talk a lot about FIRE and financial independence, but like, are you focused on that with your clients, or are you just focused on general best practices they should be following?
So I try and tailor it. So, I try to take, kind of like when I was in the Army, I never really took a political position. The president is a president. He's the boss. If he tells me, go take a machine gun nest, I'm going to go do it, whatever his political background and opinions are. So I kind of take that position with my clients, where I try not to influence them. I try not to influence them based off of my opinions. I try and keep it, I guess, almost yeah. So if a person came to me with FIRE goals, I would say, okay, let's work towards that. Or if a person came to me and said, I just want to live my life and, spend it all, maybe not spend it all, but, just want to live I really have no desire to plan, just live happy. I would say, okay, well, let's make sure we can try and hopefully set up some kind of plan, even though you don't want to plan to get that goal. So I try, like I said, I try not to bring my personal side to it, but base it off the client's choice or goals.
Interesting. So shifting to your personal beliefs, though,
Mm-hmm.
what is sort of your view on your own money and what your goals in life are and when you want to retire and how you're living? Like, we'd love to just kind of hear some about that.
Sure. So money, I don't know. Money for me has always been pretty easy to come by, and I've never really stressed in spending it. So I know I work with some clients, and we get on a budget, and they very carefully count what goes in each day and what goes out each day to the down to the cent. For me, I kind of keep it, and this is just again, my personal way of doing it. I kind of keep it more broader. I know what's coming in each day, and I know I can spend about this much on food, this much on fun, this much, and it works out for me. So much goes away for savings or retirement. So I'm not like a typical, or what you would think of as a budget person that, I'm accounting it down to the last nitnoid cent.
Right.
And that's what works for me. But I have broad goals. And again, I have some clients that we set goals and we set, benchmarks and cool graphs that show your progress. And that's one way of doing it. Well, so I have a fund that I set up for vacation, and I'm like always, okay, I'm putting in, try and put in at least $200 a month. And sometimes I bounce more in there when I can. And it works out that when vacation time comes, I generally have enough money. And if not, I just shift. So I'm not, again, not down to the nitnoid, but it's there. So that's kind of how I work. And I try and simplify things as well. So that's the other thing is I've seen people spend tons of time trying to account for everything, and they get lost in the details and forget to pull their head up to enjoy what's going on at the time.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. And
so tell us about the podcast a little bit more. How did you get the idea to start this, and what has it been like for you?
It's been fun. I started it I started it when I saw a lot of mistakes coming through my tax and financial planning practice. And I started it hopefully as a way to give military folks a resource to not make those mistakes. Because, they're generally lower income, maybe don't trust financial planners and tax folks. So probably most people in the military wouldn't pay to have a financial planner or even a tax professional really help them.
That's interesting.
But I still try and hope, and military folks tend to also be pretty independent. So that's another element there. But anyway, so hopefully somebody listens to it and then catches a mistake and saves some money. So that was what got me to start the podcast. And now that I've done it, I enjoy it. Just talking to people about random stuff. I've gotten a lot more from listeners. I've gotten questions about more broader topics. So when I first started, I thought I would keep it more around money, investments, retirement, but it's opened up to experts on mindfulness, a woman whose husband had committed suicide, how you deal with that. I've got I've got on tap, I think, a woman that specializes in alcohol addiction. So, and I just use the loose tie of that all those affect your money somehow. So that's how I justify it.
Yeah, we've also really enjoyed the whole process about talking about money with each other. And, we talked about it a couple times throughout this show, but, the differences between military and civilian financial situations aren't that different. And, really just talking to anybody, talking to any friend or family member or acquaintance about money can have some pretty profound impacts. And I think we are both seeing that on our different shows in different ways.
Yeah. No, yeah. It's just the conversation and learning about it is helpful.
Yeah.
Scott, one question that's just kind of a fun question. What purchase of $100 or less has most positively impacted your life in the past 6 months, or just in your recent memory?
So for my business, I purchased software called Zapier.
Zapier? Can you spell that?
Zapier, which, well, actually, it's a monthly service, but it's like 10 or 12 bucks a month. But it lets you have different softwares talk to each other. So like to automate stuff. So when people contact me for help with taxes, it takes their information and then Zapier automatically brings it into, like an engagement letter. And it also creates the contact in the CRM. And so even though I use it in the business, I see a lot of utility if somebody was on the personal side to, you can get your Gmail to automatically create, emails to family members in response. And then you just have to, add maybe, I don't know, you could do like
so
keep it off people's birthdays or something like that, just as a way to, because they offer a free version as well.
Yeah,
So,
it sounds a little bit like if this,
then that.
Yeah,
Yep.
maybe
Yep.
a more souped up version of that. We'll have to check it out for sure. We'll put a link in the show notes to it also.
Yeah, automated responses to my mom's emails would be really helpful for me.
That's what Mike was listening for.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I mean, you think about it, like when family members email you, it's like the same stuff for a little bit. So I use it to like, the first couple sentences of like, hey, how's it going? And then I added like a paragraph of personalization. So
Right.
it saves me from having to type, and maybe that's only like 10 seconds, but it's 10 seconds back. I don't have to type. So,
Well, if any of your family members are listening to this
I know,
episode,
right?
they're going to start questioning whether or not they're receiving real emails from you.
Scott's intros always sound the same. It sounds like it's a text expander tool too, a little bit.
yeah. Yep. Yeah.
Yeah, cool. I'm always looking for new productivity hacks, so I'll definitely check it out. One thing that I did just want to make a point of saying, Scott, that I didn't say during the intro is just a huge thank you to your service of our country and for helping others who are serving our country. Because as someone who is just a civilian and has never personally been in the military, I'm hugely kind of cognizant and recognizing of the opportunities and freedom I am afforded by people like you giving their service. So huge thank you.
Well, thanks for that. And I always tell people, give a plug for the military recruiting. I see these movies and people think they don't want to go in. And honestly, it's hard. I'm not going to lie, but the most fun, and I would have done it for half the pay. It was the best people in the world. Yeah, you go to like crappy places, the desert, but the stories and the brotherhood you get out of that time in the desert, unmatched by anything else. So thank you. And again, it was more fun than most people realize.
Well, we really appreciate you coming on the podcast, and we've really enjoyed talking with you, Scott. Thank you so much.
Thanks for having me on the show.
Thanks, Scott.
Bye, Scott.
Bye, Scott.
Bye.